Believe it or not, the food we're eating is killing us. To make matters worse, the healthcare and medical system, which is supposed to protect us, are turning a blind eye as Americans' health deteriorates day by day. This revelation comes from former Fox News star Tucker Carlson, who recently exposed the corrupt practices of big food companies and the American health system. So, what did Tucker Carlson have to say about how the food industry is damaging our health, and why is the government choosing to do nothing about it? It seems like a distant memory now, but there was a time when the food we ate didn't come in fancy packages. Genetically modified foods were unheard of, labels were non-existent, and we didn't have to worry about complex ingredient lists that most of us never bothered to check. We simply cooked and ate good food. But those days are long gone, and our homemade meals have been replaced by industrial and chemical-infused foods that have become the norm in America. Just think about it. When you walk into an average grocery store and approach the food section, doesn't it feel like you've entered a paradise of food? There's a tingling excitement as you navigate through long rows and passages filled with a dizzying array of items that are impossible to ignore. From various colors and shades of ice cream, chocolates and yogurt, to Cheez-Its and Oreos, these products beckon you from their shelves, tempting you to take them home. Some are packaged in colorful details and pictures, making them even more enticing. For some of us, it's the outlandish health promises boldly plastered on them that draw us in. But the trick isn't really in the packaging or the health promises. For many of us, it's simply the memory of a taste we long to experience again. Yet behind all the sweet sensations that fill our senses and stomachs, there lies an awful and dreadful truth that will leave you distraught and distressed. Recent research conducted at Oxford University reveals that more than 60% of the American diet consists of highly processed foods. These foods have been disassembled and reassembled with various combinations of sugar, oil, salt, and other additives. Frozen dinners, chicken, pizza, burgers, and other junk food also fall into this category. Even seemingly innocent foods like bread can be shocking. The majority of breads available in supermarkets or your favorite grocery store down the street are products of complicated concoctions of sugar, refined grains, dough conditioners, emulsifiers, and preservatives. These ingredients help the bread taste better and last longer, but they come at the cost of our lives and good health. According to another survey, over 100 million adults, nearly half of the entire population in America, have prediabetes or diabetes. In addition to that, cardiovascular diseases, which encompass conditions that affect the heart and blood vessels, affect about 122 million people. These diseases are responsible for 840,000 deaths each year, amounting to approximately 2,300 deaths per day. However, heart disease and diabetes aren't the only things processed foods are responsible for. They are also responsible for obesity, one of the biggest health problems in America. According to another bit of research, at least 3 in every 4 adults in America are either overweight or obese. If you still haven't gotten the point we're trying to make here, the truth is there are more Americans who are more sick than the ones that are healthy, which is weird considering that the American healthcare spending has jumped up to $3.5 trillion a year. But rather than debating who should be paying for all this, as most of these journalists tend to do when it comes to health matters in America, we should be asking the simpler questions. Simpler questions like, can we improve this deadly situation before it gets even worse than it already is? However, in order to understand how to improve the situation, we need to first understand how the food industry, which is supposed to be responsible for improving our health, began doing the complete opposite of that. And to do that, we need to travel to the early days of the 20th century when the food industry began to transform from small local producers to controlling how and what Americans ate. And it all began when a Canadian-born entrepreneur named James L. Kraft developed a process to turn leftover scraps of cheddar into a smooth, spreadable cheese with a longer shelf life and consistent taste. This discovery, as well as the timing of it, was a game changer for not only Kraft, but for the entire food industry. His innovation would go on to pave the way for other food companies and individuals to develop their processed foods like canned beans, frozen foods, chocolates bars, and other sugary snacks. By the 1960s, processed foods were becoming a staple in most American stores. And since most of these so-called foods were cheaper, faster to prepare, and sweeter than your normal homemade meals, Americans suddenly found themselves eating more processed meals than ever before. The 1990s came, and by this time, processed foods were everywhere, giving more power and wealth to these food companies. And as these food companies grew more powerful, so did the number of processed foods in American stores. However, fame and new products weren't the only things that were on the rise. These big companies also became increasingly greedy and were willing to do anything to make sure their victims, or perhaps customers, came back for more. To execute this, they hired their own scientists to carry out research and make experiments. During these experiments, their scientists discovered that salt, sugar, and fat were addictive. This discovery went on to not only mark a new age in the activities of the food industry, but gave power like never before to these food companies. Think about it. Why is it so hard to eat just one Oreo M&M or a Dorito chip? Why do you find yourself taking another slice of that pizza or coming back to order another burrito or burger? The answer to that lies in the addictive nature of sugar and salt and the immediate and intense pleasure they provide to you. Sugar might seem like just another everyday part of your life, but what you probably don't know is just how terrible the effects are. Believe it or not, but sugar is just as addictive as cocaine. As a matter of fact, sugar impacts the brain 20 times faster than nicotine. This makes foods like your cereals, chocolates, and other highly processed and sweetened foods the most addictive drugs out there, not cocaine or marijuana. Other examples of processed foods include white rice as opposed to brown, red, or black rice, white pasta as opposed to whole grain. Sugar, salt, and fat are then added to these foods to make them addictive, all of which help to stimulate the pleasure center in the brain, releasing chemicals that make us feel good. However, additives like sugar, salt, and fat aren't the only things we have to worry about. The way these companies process these foods often leave them with little or no nutritional value. For instance, grains are subjected to intense heat, mechanical crushing, and sometimes something they call puffing. All these things change the structure of carbohydrate molecules, leaving us, the consumers, with food-like substances rather than real food. And that's why you'd notice that whenever your cereal is dunked into your bowl of milk, it almost immediately becomes soft, requiring little to no chewing. These grains are then quickly passed through the stomach into the bloodstream before reaching that part of our system that tells us we're full. This scenario then results in blood sugar spikes, which trigger the pancreas to make more insulin. Continuous spikes of blood sugar and insulin over the years is what leads to diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Despite being aware of all this, big food companies like Kellogg's, Mars, Coca-Cola, Unilever, and of course the most ruthless of them all, Nestle, even go as far as paying grocery stores to let them display their products in places where customers can't miss them. In addition to that, these companies add a lot of false information on the wrappers of their products to mislead people into buying them for nutritional value that is not there. A good example of this is perhaps Nestle's infant formula scandal, which happened back in the 70s. At the time, Nestle had just expanded its baby formula line. However, sales were down. But in order to make money, Nestle began advertising their baby formula as a superior alternative to breast milk. The company claimed that baby formula provides all the necessary nutrients that breast milk is incapable of. Now you'd think that Nestle would stop there, but they didn't. Instead, they hired salesmen and dressed them up as doctors and nurses before sending them to developing countries in Asia and Africa to convince mothers to give up breastfeeding for their formulas. They even gave these mothers free samples for them to try. Now, because most of these women were uneducated and wanted to relieve themselves of the troubles of breastfeeding, they believed it. Nestle also knew that if a woman stops breastfeeding for a while, it takes only a few days for her milk to dry up and her hormones to go back to normal. That way, when the free formula eventually runs out, so would her breast milk. And with no formula or breast milk to turn to, the poor mother would be left with no other choice but to keep buying Nestle's baby formula. The other choice would be to watch her child starve to death, and like the plan of an evil genius, it worked. Nestle made millions of dollars while millions of babies died, and those that didn't were unhealthy as they lacked the necessary nutrients breast milk would have given them. However, Nestle isn't the only one guilty of false advertising. Many other companies like Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Red Bull, or other companies that have mastered the art of using false advertising to lure customers to their products. The only difference is that most of them don't go the extra mile like Nestle in this case to ruin people's lives. Rather, what they do is put their product in your face so much that it registers your subconscious. That's why they spend so much money on advertising on your TV screens, on your social media platforms, and so on. This is because they know that the more you see their products, the more likely you are to give it a try. Now, if you're asking yourself how these companies have gotten away with these lies and crimes for so long, trust me, you're not alone. And the simple answer to that question is because these companies have grown too powerful, and also people are allowed to eat whatever they want. Back in the 90s, the food industry found themselves under the scrutiny of the government for the health effects of their products. But they fought back using powerful marketing campaigns and lobbying efforts, and eventually they got away with it. But you have to wonder how it makes any sense that these companies are able to get away with destroying people's health and lives. Some people believe that the only answer to this is that there are people in the government that are just as corrupt as these companies. Apart from that, you have to consider the fact that the food industry makes hundreds of billions of dollars every year, some of which go to the government in the form of taxes. Let's not also forget that some of these companies sponsor the campaigns of these politicians, a cunning move that has given them significant influence over food policy and regulations. The World Health Organization is also helpless in the situation, as the bulk of the money they get comes from the government, who are sponsored by these big food companies. This is why big food companies continue to get away with their crimes. It's also why they continue to prioritize their profits over our lives, because they need that money to keep the government away from their operations. What makes the situation even more dangerous is the fact that many people are unaware of the dangers of the products made by these companies. When you think about all of this, it appears that we are helpless in this situation, but not entirely. One solution is for us to choose whole foods instead of processed foods, to buy fresh meat, beef, and other products over frozen foods. At the end of the day, we are all responsible for our lives, and that means we're responsible for what we take inside our mouths. And if we want to be healthy, free from heart conditions, obesity, and diabetes, the choice is up to us to take what we eat seriously. That's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.